All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. This will be posted on Cruel Reader's Thesis. This is a discussion that I and my other two fellow hosts of ShakeTember are doing. So ShakeTember is a September event where we celebrate Shakespeare. And this year we are doing it a little bit differently, where we read 4 plays and all the hosts read the 4 plays together and do these Zoom chats. And we're posting them on different channels. This week's will be posted on my channel, and next week's will as well. And we've all been sharing the past discussions anyway. So this is Rainey from Rainy Day Reads, one of the other hosts, and then Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, the third host. So as you can tell, I'm not very good at introducing group chats. Anyway, so Henry IV Part 1 is what we read this week, and I have a very interesting. A very nice addition with a painting of Falstaff. That's Sir Ralph Richardson as Falstaff. Anyway, so that's a cool cover.
Yeah, well, this is the 4 his. This is Richard II through Henry V, all in one volume.
Cool.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
So this is an interesting instance because this is Jason's first time reading the play. This is Rainey's second time reading the play, and this is my third time reading the play. So I read this a few years ago, and I actually made a video about it for what was then ShakeTube, along with the second part of Henry IV, which I read. And it's weird because when I read it then, I raved about it and felt like I kind of had the measure of it. And then I read it this time and felt like somehow I didn't anymore. It confused me this time for some reason, which it did, I feel like it didn't last time I read it. So I had a really weird experience. So I'm curious to hear from both of you kind of your opening statements of what your experiences of reading the play was this time around. And I don't know, Rainey, do you want to go first?
Sure. So yeah, it is my second time within this year reading this play. I read it with Jason's wife Kelly a few months ago, and I've also seen the play in New York with Ethan Hawke as Hal. Or no, that's wrong. As Hotspur.
I was gonna say he sounds like more of a Hotspur.
Yeah, I was like, wait a second, I said that wrong. He was definitely a Hotspur because he just yelled the entire play. And I was like, I feel like you need to have a little bit more range than that. I don't know. And he just yelled throughout the entire play. It was very distracting, actually. But I would say this time around reading it, I liked I don't do well with the history plays because they're very war centric and political centric, and I don't like politics or war in any era, and so that just my eyes just kind of glaze over during those scenes. But I did like the parts with Hal and Falstaff. I feel like they are if somebody's going to remember anything from this play, I kind of feel like it's going to be those scenes. That's why to me Falstaff is so iconic. And then I just remember the Hotspur scenes from when I saw Ethan Hawke sort of butcher it in New York. So I would say I enjoyed it more on this reread as far as the Falstaff and Hal scenes. I thought that they were funny, but they were also kind of sad in the way that Hal was treating Falstaff. So I just got more of the nuances that this time around, I guess. So those are my opening thoughts.
Okay.
So my experience reading the play this week, I can't remember if I started it on Monday night or I think I tried starting it on Monday night. And I read the first, it was 4 pages in my edition. It's equivalent to the first 60 lines of the play. And I didn't understand a whit of what I read. I mean, not a whit. And so I got kind of scared because I knew I was going to have to get through this play, and we were going to be talking about it. So I put it down, and then I did something else for maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes. And I came back to it and I reread those 60 lines, and I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand anything. And so I said, all right, I'll just try this tomorrow. And so the next day I started from the very beginning again. And I got it. I got a lot more from those lines. I kind of found my way into it a little bit, which isn't to say that there still aren't. So when we talked about Othello, you know, I talked about how I felt like there were passages in Othello that were actually kind of clunky for Shakespeare, that the language itself felt clunky and inelegant and et cetera, et cetera. And that was not the case with this. I feel like this has some of the most beautiful poetry of any of Shakespeare's plays that I've read. But it's still really, really dense, even by Shakespeare's standards. I feel like, I mean, the king has one long speech. It's a speech where he's essentially trying to, I don't know, he's taking his son to task for not, you know, being a man, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, the thing is 3 pages long. And there were huge chunks of it that I thought, wow, this is really beautiful. I don't know what the hell he's saying necessarily, but so that was challenging. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting reading experience, right? I mean, Act 5 is quite short, and Act 2, it seems to go on for like 5 days of reading time, right? Which was odd. And then also I found it really, really interesting how there were these scenes that were comic, I mean, tinged with melancholy, I suppose. And then there were also these scenes that were just incredibly intense. But for me, I mean, the thing I suppose I found most interesting about the play is how there are multiple scenes in the play that are all about, or seem to be all about, kind of undercutting or subverting masculine bluster, right? I mean, that this kind of puffing oneself up, whether it's Falstaff pretending to have done something that he hasn't actually done, or Glendower, like, you know, trying to kind of paint himself as Thor or something. I mean, you know, he's like this Welsh god. I think he's from Wales. Is that right? Or no? Maybe he's Scottish. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think Scottish, maybe.
Yeah. But you know, and then Hotspur kind of checking him, right, saying, "Oh well, no, like those things, the earth's shaking. Those things would have happened even if you weren't born, et cetera, et cetera." So I thought that was really interesting. It felt to me like a play that was trying to get at the meaning of kind of what makes a man, right? You know, and there are all these guys in the play who are trying to kind of build themselves up in the eyes of others. And then they're always being kind of checked somehow. And yeah, so it was really good, man. It was beautiful. And yeah, it's the kind of play, and this is true of all Shakespeare, probably, certainly most Shakespeare, that I feel like I'm going to get more on a second read. Although with your experience, Lukash, I mean, feeling like the third read had you kind of adrift and lost a little bit, that worries me, I suppose, a tiny bit. But
I don't know. So yeah, there are scenes and there are chunks of prose. I actually think the prose spoken by a lot of the characters in this is really magnificent. I actually I think like this is one of the plays where there's both beautiful poetry and beautiful prose on Shakespeare's part. There are plays of his that are more dominated by prose than this one, and there are plays of his that are more dominated by verse, but this is one where they feel pretty equally they have an equal amount of whatever screen time, page whatever, equal number of lines in prose and verse. And there were bits where I was just like, what the hell is this talking about? Like, what is he saying? Like, what is going on in this scene? I don't know what these people are doing, you know? And it wasn't so much the opening verse, it was actually it's just weird how that's one of the first times reading a Shakespeare play where I literally have just gone through a scene and been like, what did I just read? What just happened? And again, it's weird that would happen on a reread. Like, you would think after having, this being my third time, I wouldn't have that problem anymore. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether I zipped through it too quickly the last time, or whether I just forgot that much, or what. But it was bizarre kind of sometimes. But I think what I came out of this. So I mean, I love Falstaff. He's one of my favorite characters, and what I kind of came out of this play thinking to myself was that even though Falstaff isn't like, I don't think he's not the paragon of goodness in this world of evil people, because he clearly does things that are bad, and so like I mean, he basically lets his whole troop that he's given command of just die so that he can take all of their money. So he does something quite horrific, in fact. But what struck me is that, unlike most of the other characters, he's not all that hypocritical. Like, he kind of just knows what he's doing and admits to doing it. So I mean, I guess he doesn't always admit to doing it, but I don't know. He seems to be honest in a way the other characters aren't, sort of. And what I don't know. He seems to be a character who has very few illusions about what's going on in the world. He kind of realizes that this whole rebellion is just kind of stupid. The whole conflict that they're fighting over is just kind of dumb. It's like, oh, the king wanted those prisoners returned to him and he didn't, so we threw a hissy fit over it. And so on. And so he seems to just realize that it's all dumb, and so he's decided that he's also just going to act kind of in line with the way other people act, and he knows it. But it seems like Hal learns that lesson from him, that it's all kind of BS, but he is sort of, I think what we see him do in the next play, and the Henry V play, is sort of this cynical manipulation of it. He's like, okay, because it's all bullshit, I'm just going to use it all to my own ends to become this king who's going to be revered forever because I can. And so anyway, I'm not making much sense right now, but that was something that I noticed, if what I just said makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I think that, I mean, what I got from what you were saying is that Falstaff and Hal both they're kind of opportunistic, right? I mean, they see what's happening, right? They kind of take the lay of the land, as it were, and they see. I mean, in Falstaff's case, like, he's like, okay, well, how can I benefit from this? What can I do? How can I kind of manipulate when he stabs the hole in Hotspur's thigh and whatnot, and conjures up this story about how he actually killed the man. Yeah, I mean, they're always looking for some way to kind of get some benefit or advancement, et cetera, et cetera. And I part of me wonders how, or why it is Hal makes that turn into kind of becoming the son that his father wants him to be. Like, I don't think it's just the speech that does it, and I don't think it's just some kind of maybe shame or something at having been wasting his time, with this big drunken lout and et cetera, et cetera. I guess that's the thing I would look for the most on a reread, is trying to understand Hal's motivation for kind of correcting his course.
Well, he has that speech where he says, "Oh, I'm gonna act like I'm gonna hang out with this jacked false, these trashy people, and act like a delinquent, so that when I become king and do become and am a great leader, people will think I'm even greater than they would have otherwise thought I was, because I started out as this like lost soul or whatever." He has this speech where he kind of says that. Sorry?
Yeah. I've had character development, so I must, I've had a great character arc. So he's almost kind of, I took it as like, he's almost kind of Shakespeare's poking fun at his own style, like that, like Hal knows that that's what he's doing, is trying to create a character arc for himself. And he's putting it right out there for everybody to see.
I like that idea. I like that idea. Yeah. Yeah, no, I that's interesting because like I didn't read I've read Marjorie Garber's chapter essay on Henry IV Part 1 before, so I didn't reread it, but I remember that at the very end she kind of briefly compares Hal to Hamlet. And like what you just said sounds like something Hamlet would do, you know what I mean? So yeah, no, I like that idea.
It makes it difficult though, doesn't it, to sympathize with Hal? If
Mhm.
if he's, I don't know, if everything he's doing in life is in service to kind of, constructing this artificial narrative about himself, right? If he's not really in the moment enjoying his time with Falstaff, et cetera, et cetera, if he's just doing these things as a means to an end, I don't know. I feel like for me, it would make it more difficult to sympathize with him because everything feels very calculated and very clinical and very kind of cold. Um, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I see that. I totally see what you guys are saying. But and maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what Shakespeare wants us to feel, to see, right? I mean, maybe that's how he means us to see Hal is somebody that we're not necessarily meant to sympathize with. I don't know.
Yeah, and
Or,
that's why, sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say, or I guess it could be like that typical teenage angst type of a thing. Like he knows he's gonna have to step up at some point and be a king, so he's just gonna enjoy himself while he can, and he knows that it's not gonna last, but he's gonna live it up while he still can. So he might be fully enjoying himself and wanting that to be his life, but he knows what ultimately he's going to have to do. So,
Yeah. And like what you were saying, Jason, about him not being it being difficult to sympathize with him, like that's what makes the reading. So some people read the play as like a coming of age tale about Hal, and I find it really difficult to read that way because of basically what you just said, that I feel like, he is not all that sympathetic. And I don't necessarily, because of that speech where he says that this is what he's going to do, that he's going to be a delinquent and then, whatever. It suggests that there really isn't any growth. And I feel like if you're going to have a coming of age story, there needs to be, growth, because that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's also why I don't like Henry V, the play Henry V, that much as some people do, because I just find it to be really actually quite shallow, because it's just anyway. But yeah.
well, I'm glad to hear that you both had like you weren't real sure what was going on half of the time, because I thought, like, is it just because I don't like war stuff that I'm not getting this, or I'm glazing over this? But at least I know it's not just me. Because I just
No, it was definitely a challenge. And I think part of what made it difficult is I feel like Shakespeare there was so much with the poetry in this. There was so much alliteration in places, and there was so much internal rhyme. And I feel like he was paying so much attention to the beauty of the writing that that I feel like a little bit of clarity was sacrificed.
Yeah.
Just by like, oh, I need a word here that's going to chime off this word in the previous line, and it just felt very kind of carefully written as poetry, and yeah, and so as a result, I mean, it wasn't always terribly kind of lucid, I suppose. So one thing I wanted to bring up, which I suppose kind of feeds into what we're talking about, Hal. I mean, does he grow? Does he, this, that, the other thing? So I'm intrigued by, this idea that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, maybe I misinterpreted this, but it seems like it seemed to me that Hal that he kind of proposed an end to this conflict by just him and Hotspur essentially having a duel, right? Like, let it just be the two of us. And then that's, it didn't come to pass for obvious reasons, or for various reasons, excuse me. And what I find interesting about them is that it's the kind of proposal that serves two functions that seem to be kind of diametrically opposed to each other. One, it seems like an act of wisdom befitting a king, right, or a would-be king, because it would be, saving a lot of lives, et cetera, and putting yourself on the front line of something, and in service of trying to protect your people. But on the other hand, it also feels very solipsistic and teenage, right? Kind of proposing a mano face off, and so I found that really, really intriguing. Because on the one hand, if we read it the one way, it does seem like a real leap of growth, a leap of maturity, a leap of wisdom and Hal. But on the other hand, it also seems like a young kid, confronting the bully on the block, saying, "Hey, man, let's go in the alley and let's kick each other's asses, and whoever makes it through to the end with the least amount of blood spilled is the winner. And let's make sure all the girls are watching, right?" So yeah, I don't know. It feels like a play that's doing a lot of kind of competing things, I suppose, and which makes it interesting. But yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we're supposed to kind of see Hal as this young chap who's coming of age, but on the other hand, right, he seems like he doesn't grow at all, like you said, Lukash, because it's all very calculated as part of some kind of stratagem somehow for his future and thinking about his future. Like he's a politician wondering how his past is going to be spun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of think that I read it more that way. That maybe he just has, obviously he has something against Hotspur, but I feel like it's even more personal with him because his own father kind of liked Hotspur better than him, and for the longest time, and I feel like that was like his own personal vendetta, like, I'm gonna show my father that I'm better than you, kind of a thing. So yeah, I feel like it was still just kind of more teenage back alley kind of fighting, and didn't really have anything to do with he wanted to save lives, but he thought, again, like, I'm gonna have a character arc. And everybody's gonna think I did this because I'm gonna be such a great king, but I'm really just trying to puff myself up.
Yeah, that does make Hotspur kind of an interesting foil to him, though. I mean, for one thing, he has the same name; they're both named Henry. But because like Hotspur's whole motivation for his rebellion is, is loyalty to his brother-in-law, right? Is a loyalty to family, basically, which is, I mean, we could see that as kind of a loyalty that's very, how should I put this? Primeval, maybe is the word. It's just like, loyalty to family. That's like one of the oldest kinds of loyalty, right? It's like, you're loyal to your parents, loyal to your children, et cetera, et cetera. And he has this very kind of, you might almost say, primitive motive behind his rebellion. It's just like, oh, you want to imprison my brother-in-law, I'm gonna rebel against you. And so he strikes me as the opposite of Hal in the sense that he's very sort of earnest, I guess, whereas Hal is the opposite of earnest in almost everything, right? And that makes them interesting foils, that I think, and I hadn't thought of that until we had started this conversation. So
I really liked Hotspur as a character. I thought he was he just had, I mean, he had so much passion, and one of the things I found really interesting about Hotspur was that he was so fiery and kind of tempestuous, but at the same time he was so rational, right? Like when he's talking to Glendower and trying to put Glendower in his place, and like everything he was speaking was just really, really rational. And so I found that a really interesting mix. I thought he was a much more interesting character actually than Hal, for myself. But yeah, if I were to see Ethan Hawke play him, I would want Ethan Hawke to modulate his voice a little bit, I suppose. Know when to raise your voice, but you know when to yell. Don't yell
Right.
all the time.
Yeah, because
But,
I think it's definitely better for that part to see the rational side be more like calm and calculated. And then whenever he's with his friends, freak out,
Yeah.
After he leaves those meetings, then he can freak out and be Hotspur, but, yeah, but that didn't happen with Ethan.
This thing hasn't been filmed very much, I don't think. What did you guys have any actors in mind when you read this play? I mean, who would be a good Falstaff now, for instance, if somebody were to make a film of the Henry plays?
Well, the one that whenever I saw Ethan Hawke, it was Kevin Kline was Falstaff.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
yeah, so that was good. That
Did he have padding on, or what? Did he gain weight for the part? Or?
He definitely, I feel like it was padding. It
Gotcha.
was a long time ago. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but I think it was padding. Yeah. But
What about Adam Sandler?
that'd be awesome. Yeah,
I can't see that myself.
Well, I don't know. I know I don't know. I don't know if it would work, but I don't know. It might be seen as a cast against type kind of thing, but I don't know. The first person that popped into my mind, and I don't know if it's because he was kind of a heavier guy, and again, I don't know if it would really end up working, but Philip Seymour Hoffman. Again, I don't know about him.
Oh, he would have been a good Falstaff, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know. I mean, because Phil Hoffman tended to play kind of dark characters, right? Or at least that's what I can remember off the top of my head about him. He tended to play sort of dark characters, but he also could he had a sense of humor. So I don't know. I think he could be interesting. He would have been interesting.
The actor I'm thinking of, and I wasn't thinking of at all before we started this conversation, it just popped into my head here in the last few minutes, is Brendan Gleeson. I think Brendan Gleeson could be a good Falstaff.
Sorry, who has Brendan Gleeson played?
So he was Mad Eye Moody in the Harry Potter movies.
Oh, right. Yeah, I like him. Why do I never remember his name? I really like that actor. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
He also kind of plays characters who tend to be kind of dark, but he again kind of has a sense of humor. He can pull off humorous things. Yeah.
Well, and he definitely also has a sense of that bluster, that Falstaff kind of has. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and the young guys, I don't know. I guess I feel like I just don't know enough young actors anymore. I have a difficult time. I think it would be interesting to see, or would have been interesting at some point to see, for instance, like Daniel Radcliffe play Hal. I mean, Daniel Radcliffe had a really nice stretch there where he was on the London stage and some really highly acclaimed productions for a while. And he, I don't know, it seems like this character would be within his range, I suppose. I think that he's proven himself to be a pretty accomplished actor.
The actor who, I want to say his last name is like Keoghan or something. He's Irish.
The dude who's in The Green Knight and Killing of Sacred Deer. Yeah,
I feel like he would make a good Poins. One of the weird side characters.
He would make a good Poins.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
Yeah,
he would make a good Poins. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know enough about actors and things to really say much. And then whenever I've seen them in things, like when I've seen Ethan Hawke and Kevin Kline, that's all I can ever think about afterwards. Like I can't think about anybody else.
Yeah. So the only two film versions of this I know are an older one called The Chimes at Midnight, which was directed by
Orson Welles.
Yeah, but that's like, I think that's both Henry IV plays plus something from the Merry Wives of Windsor, all kind of melded into one movie. I don't know quite how he did that, but apparently he did. And I think Orson Welles himself plays Falstaff, I believe. And maybe Laurence Olivier plays.
I'm intrigued. I've never seen Chimes at Midnight.
But
Look it up.
yeah, there was that, and then there was a while ago. There was I think it was a TV miniseries called The Hollow Crown, which I think it had all the history plays or all the ones in the cycle of starting with Richard II and probably ending with Richard III. And I forget who played. Oh, you know what? I think it was Michael Fassbender who played Hal. I want to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We haven't seen The Hollow Crown. We were just looking for it on streaming. It's not anywhere on streaming right now. And I'm not even sure it's available to buy on DVD or Blu-ray right now. So we may end up having to check it out from the library. But yeah, so I'm looking at Chimes at Midnight. It's on HBO Max right now, Chimes at Midnight. And yeah, Orson Welles played Falstaff. John Gielgud was Henry IV. Trying to see who Hal was. You wouldn't think that he'd be quite so buried in the cast list, but Keith Baxter. Don't know who the hell that is.
Yeah,
never heard that name.
I guess I was way off with Laurence Olivier.
Yeah,
I'm probably when I was reading this, I was imagining Hal as Laurence Olivier because I've seen the Laurence Olivier's Henry V, where obviously Hal is Henry V. And Laurence Olivier plays him. So I was imagining Hal as Laurence Olivier. Even though
I'm gonna see if Kelly wants to watch this. Because I don't know. I guess for some reason I never realized Chimes at Midnight was Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, something that stood out to me this read, something that did stand out to me was the side characters like Poins. I don't think they had quite stuck out to me last time I read it. I think I was so enraptured by Falstaff that I didn't take as much note of them, but I thought Poins was hilarious. There's a line, so when he first proposes to Hal that they're going to mug Falstaff and his buddies after Falstaff and his buddies steal something from someone else at this fair or whatever it is, he's just like, if we do not mug them and steal their stuff, then cut off my head or something like that. Now it's just like, whenever I propose something to a friend from now on, I'm just gonna be like, if we don't do this, then cut off my head.
The Adventures of Poins. Yeah, no, he was a really great character. I mean, really minor, but really really memorable and really funny. I wish I had marked more of the writing that I really liked, right? The prose and the poetry that I really liked. But I did mark a couple things that I want to share with you guys that I thought were incredibly beautiful. And this first one is it's prose that Falstaff is speaking, but it feels like poetry to me. And he says, "Marry then, sweet wag, when thou art king, let not us that are squires of the night's body be called thieves of the day's beauty. Let us be Diana's foresters, gentlemen of the shade, minions of the moon. And let men say we be men of good government, being governed as the sea is, by our noble and chaste mistress, the moon, under whose countenance we steal." Right? That's gorgeous. That's really, really beautiful. And then just a little bit later, King Henry has this just wonderful few lines. "Oh, sir, your presence is too bold and peremptory, and majesty might never yet endure the moody frontier of a servant brow." And I love that idea, the moody frontier of a servant brow. I mean, what a beautiful way to communicate what's going on behind an expression. So yeah, it's got just an awful lot of beautiful writing in it. An awful lot of beautiful writing in it. So one of the things, so I was talking, texting back and forth with my friend Chuck, who was my old theater professor when I was in junior college. and he really loves this play, and he actually had taken my brother and I, along with some other students, down to the Colorado Shakespeare Festival in Boulder to see a production of Henry IV Part 1. So even though I hadn't read it, I had seen it done live once. And he was talking about something that we haven't necessarily kind of brought up, I suppose, in this conversation. He was talking about how Falstaff is a kind of father figure for Hal, and that Hal kind of casting him off is Hal kind of recognizing that Falstaff is a false father figure, or an incompetent father figure, or something like this. And so that there's this thing going on in the play, right, where the characters are kind of shuffling through their role models, trying to find the right role model, which is an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I definitely kind of felt like that was the case with Falstaff for most of it, because just even the things that he would say to Hal, like the part that you read from Falstaff, is kind of like guiding him towards the future, sort of, and trying to like tell him how he should feel about things whenever he's king. So yeah, it is kind of like he's trying to mold him in a way that would benefit him in the end, so yeah, but then maybe that is a little bit of character growth on Hal's part, that he recognized that he shouldn't go off of that, but
but is his actual biological father any better of a father figure?
True.
I don't know. Yeah, because it's like,
I
mean, because like, I think some of the rebel characters, I'm sorry, like other than Hotspur, a lot of the rebel characters, they all kind of blur together because their names are all like, oh, Glendower, Worcestershire. Anyway,
Worcestershire.
I kept wanting to say his name, Worcestershire, but all these characters, but I know that there are various points where some of them do make some good points about kind of the opportunism of Henry IV.
They were done wrong by him.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because so often when you look at history, when there is some sort of a coup like this, where Richard II was overthrown, the allies of the person who did the coupping often get taken, mysteriously disappear, or are mysteriously assassinated not long after, or are just executed. And it was interesting. This rebellion was basically a process of that happening, of Henry IV having opportunistically seized the throne, and now he needs to sort of clear out all the people who helped him, because he can't trust them, because they also willingly betrayed Richard II. And yeah, so anyway, he strikes me as himself a very kind of cynical character in a way. And so we have, on the one hand, him, we have Falstaff, who himself, as we've established, isn't a great father figure, because he himself is kind of nihilistic and not the best role model, and so on and so forth. But then, who is anyone left with? I mean, I don't know who Hotspur had as a father figure. I don't know who Hal is supposed to choose as a father figure. Yeah, it's weird. It does anyway, it does sort of present this world where authority figures aren't to be trusted, including father figures, which is pretty bleak when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, especially, if we're looking at the young men in this play as whether consciously or not, trying to imagine their own futures, imagine themselves in positions of power as leaders. How can you make yourself into a leader without anyone really to look up to? That's a conundrum. That's a tricky question, right? What do you guys make of that scene, which I think is probably the most famous scene in the play? That scene at the end of that really long Act 2, where Hal and Falstaff are kind of switching roles, right? And I found that intriguing, right? It made me wonder how much easier it might be to say I mean, so is it from King Lear? Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. I think is a line from King Lear. This idea of changing roles like that, and how much easier is it for these characters to speak their minds, right? To let the other one know how they want to be treated, they wish to be treated, by this kind of putting on a different hat, and role playing like that. I found that scene. I almost wanted to read that scene again, actually, because I just found the whole role playing part of it really interesting, and what it was revealing about the character, about Falstaff's insecurity and his fear, right? That he's going to be kind of let go, that he's going to be kind of forgotten. And then Hal's, I suppose Hal's insecurity about, I don't know what, like how he's supposed to conduct himself, should he kind of cut ties with these people, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like they get closer to the heart of what they really feel and what they're really talking about when they put on these other hats, I suppose. And I could be reading all that completely wrong. I mean, I can see that I may have read that scene totally wrong, but yeah.
I mean, I thought there were times, and especially in that scene, where I did feel more empathy for both characters, because you are getting a little bit more into their own heads, even though on the surface and their actions are not really honorable or anything like that, any of them really, but to see that their actions maybe are based off of their own fear and like you said, their own insecurity, does give them a little bit, to me, more sympathetic quality. Still, in the end, I don't think that I really enjoyed either of them as characters, but I felt a little bit more like they had a little bit more well-roundedness at that point.
And you do feel really sad for Falstaff,
yeah,
at the end of that scene, right,
yeah,
where he's essentially kind of pleading. He's essentially pleading with Hal, for his own, I don't know, for some respect, for some, like,
right.
Recognize me as a friend, right? I mean, he's thought like I am. I'm a good guy, right? I'm here. I'm the fun guy. Like, I mean, let's not cast me off.
Yeah.
It was really moving, I thought, to see him in the voice of another person pleading his own case, I suppose. Yeah, it was really poignant. I suppose would be a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting about that scene was that earlier in the play, at some point, maybe it was even earlier in the same act, they had this joke about how Falstaff was, what Hal was actually joking about was having Falstaff be the hangman, I think, or the executioner of some sort. But Falstaff either mistakenly or intentionally sort of twisted what he said to mean that he would be the judge, that he would be like the arbiter of who get, that he would be the judge of criminals. But what Hal actually meant was that he'd be the executioner. And what I thought was interesting is that now we come to that scene that you're talking about, and they do sort of set Falstaff up as a mock judge, right? Because he's his father, sort of passing judgment on him. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of sort of poetic symmetry between those two themes. Yeah,
I didn't really notice that. Yeah, that's a great point, Nakash. That's a really great point.
But I was noticing echoes like that through different scenes. And what was particularly interesting was when stuff that Falstaff would say would kind of be echoed by the sort of courtiers, the quote unquote noble characters, the royalty and whatnot. Because like Hotspur goes on and on about honor, right? And his honor and other people's honor. And a lot of these noble courtiers go on about it too. And then, of course, Falstaff has that great spiel near the end, which is my favorite passage from the play, where he kind of mocks the whole idea of honor, right? I think that's the easiest example, but I kept seeing these parallelisms between what Falstaff was saying, or not just Falstaff, but just the peasant characters in general, and what the, hoity-toity characters were saying as well. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect.
Yeah.
Of the play.
I think that's something that Shakespeare does a really great job at, is showing how, whether you're noble or a peasant, that a lot of your same fears and a lot of your same ambitions and everything are really the same. They just come across differently, or just, he just does a good job with the parallel like that, because there's a lot of scenes in Shakespeare where that occurs, I think.
Well, it's that line again, right? The moody frontier of a servant brow, right? Right, not just anyone's brow, but a servant's brow, right? The fact that a servant can have this really complicated kind of inner life that is coming through their eyes, or their the creases in their forehead, or the contraction of their eyebrows. It's just amazing that he can, in one line, remind us that it's a king reminding us, right? With that line, that even the underlings, right, even the people on whose labor and on whose backs these kingdoms are built, that they're capable of that depth of feeling as well.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting how because pretty much all of the scenes with all the royal and noble characters are in verse, and they're again in this very difficult elaborate style with all the wordplay and alliteration. And I think that's all very intentional, actually, because I think they're supposed to sound kind of hoity-toity. That's sort of how I saw a lot of those characters. And so here they are sounding all hoity-toity and like they're up in the sky and important. And then you see the scenes with the peasants where they are like the exact opposite, and yet there's still that beauty there. And they're the peasants, and especially Falstaff, is often mocking the ideas that these noble characters hold in such high regard, right? Anyway, I think it's like subversive in a indirect way, and it's interesting to me that Shakespeare, in a country and a society which still had a monarchy, was able to infuse this play with a sort of subtle critique of monarchy and nobility's ideas of themselves, because my sense is that at the time, people who were royal, people who were noble, thought that they were above everyone else in some way, not just that it was the title, it was that they were actually better somehow. And here he is really subverting that. And I feel like it must have been kind of ballsy of him to infuse this play with this critique of that in the society he was in, you know what I mean? Especially since well, anyway, yeah. So I just find that an interesting aspect.
Mm-hmm.
the quiet
Yes.
no, it's no, I think that's a good point, Lukash. Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, and Shakespeare did that, right? I mean, he did that multiple times through his career, seeing how far he could kind of push an envelope when it came to the possibility of offending the monarchy or aristocrats, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he was constantly, well, not constantly, I suppose, but just seeing what he could get away with in terms of social commentary. And and I think, I mean, that's, like you said, it's ballsy, right? I mean, it's even today, it's ballsy for a writer to to write a novel that is taking the piss out of the political system or something like this. Especially if there's a risk of being alienated because maybe that writer's position is not in vogue necessarily. There's something really gutsy about it.
Or if they're living in a certain country with a certain regime, right?
I mean, and that's even ballsy, right? I mean, their life can be on the line or something like this. Just to think that the idea of publishing something could get you killed, right? Writing something and putting it out there, disseminating, could get you killed is that's a terrifying idea. Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, it could have been done even then, right? I mean, these playwrights would sometimes get in really hot water. They get in really, really deep shit for having written and performed something that they thought was worth putting out there, and they had to know, they had to be like, okay, well, how much damage might this do to my career, right? I mean, am I going to be put in the clink, right? For writing this and putting it out there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I do wonder if maybe the tone of Henry V, the play Henry V, was to make up for possibly being subversive in this, because sorry, I know that a lot of people really love Henry V, but I don't.
Kelly loves Henry V, yeah.
Yeah, and there's some beautiful writing in it and everything, but I find it to just be a really shallow play, because it's just like, huzzah, Battle of Agincourt, we won, we beat the French, blah blah blah. It's just it's to me just so it's basically, to my mind, just jingoism without much to redeem it or to make it particularly nuanced or interesting. And I feel like, and I wonder if maybe he wrote that play to make up for possibly getting under some people's skin in the Henry IV plays. Maybe.
Yeah.
Was Richard II? Richard II was the only history play I had read prior to this. Was Richard II the play that? God, man, it's been so long since I've read a biography of Shakespeare or seen any of the movies. There was a play that was staged, and I mean, it landed some people. Well, I think it led to some people being executed, actually, because I don't know. There was this whole thing like, oh, is this about Elizabeth, right? Are they saying, oh, is this about Elizabeth, right? Is there going to be an attempt to overthrow Elizabeth? Was this? And then like they had Shakespeare and his company stage this particular play. I think it was Richard II, in order to kind of drum up support for a coup. And Shakespeare, right? And Shakespeare was lucky to kind of escape without any real repercussions to himself. But the people who kind of engineered the putting on of the production were the ones who ended up in hot water.
That vaguely rings a bell.
Yeah, I feel like I have heard something about that, but I'm not sure which play it was either.
Yeah,
I feel like it was Richard II, but anyway, I mean, that would be another example of that, right? I mean, that would be another example of an artist, in this case, not necessarily an artist writing the play in order to do that, but allowing the play to be put on, or allowing oneself to be kind of roped into something that could be potentially very dangerous, right? Because it kind of feels seditious, and maybe that's the whole point of it. And yeah, I don't know. Part of me feels like Shakespeare. I don't know. Part of me feels like he must have had some kind of close friendship with the Queen or something, because it feels like he just got away with a lot of shit that maybe not a lot of other writers would have been able to get away with. And maybe they were buddies, and she snuck him in the tunnels underneath the palace or something, right?
Well,
maybe
aren't some of the people who were crazy about the authorship controversy, aren't there some people who think that Elizabeth wrote Shakespeare's play?
There are some people who think that, yeah. Those people are crazy. But no, so speaking of the authorship question, right? If we want to go down just a little nook of a rabbit hole here, where do you guys sit on that? I mean, how much thought have you given to it?
We talked about it in my Shakespeare class many years ago, and I kind of land on the Shakespeare is who we think Shakespeare is. He was like just a guy that wanted to write plays, and he wasn't like, to me, some lord or a woman or anything like that. He was who we originally all thought he was. That's kind of where I land on it. But then at the same time, I kind of think, does it matter? Because we have these plays, and that's what we got. And that's probably all we're ever gonna have or know, you know? So
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in a similar place. I've personally never found the authorship question particularly interesting, just because, like what Rainey said at the end there, like, I mean, we have these plays that are attributed to Shakespeare. I think it's in our best interest to just accept that they were
Yeah.
more or less written by a guy named Shakespeare, and to just, what matters is the plays themselves. You know, ultimately it doesn't matter that much who wrote them, because I mean,
but
sorry.
it'd be interesting to know, of course, but
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think any definitive proof is going to come to light at any point showing that Shakespeare did not write these plays. And I just, I don't know, I find the whole subject a little, I don't know, I feel like there's a weird obsession with I don't know, it's like, yeah. So anyway, what matters is that we have these plays and that we can read them, and you know, I think it's in our best interest to just kind of read the plays for what they are. I mean, you know, yeah. And so I just find like the idea of reading a book on the authorship controversy is like, so anyway, because I just find it so vastly uninteresting. Anyway,
Yeah.
but
So I'm with you guys. I mean, I think that Shakespeare likely wrote the plays of William Shakespeare. You know, and you know, I've kind of heard that. I mean, there's so many high-profile actors who are convinced that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare, right? That it was the Earl of Oxford or somebody. Mark Rylance is one of those, right?
Sigmund
I think
Freud.
Derek Jacobi. What's that?
Sigmund Freud thought that the Earl of Staffordshire or something, that one of the candidates wrote Shakespeare. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, so Charles Dickens, if my memory is correct, Charles Dickens didn't believe that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, and his reasoning was that, oh, this man, he came from such humble beginnings, how could he write this stuff? And I want to go back in time and tell Dickens, you came from humble beginnings, man. Like, I mean, more humble beginnings probably than Shakespeare did, and look what you created. You know, I feel like the people who are like, oh, well, he was just a country boy, he couldn't possibly have done this. I feel like those people aren't taking into account a couple of things. I feel like they're not taking into account the possibility of genius in a person, right? So just unqualified genius in a person. They're not taking into account the possibility that maybe Shakespeare had a photographic memory, right? I mean, I can't believe that that's something that only exists today, right? And so maybe that's how he was able to kind of just have these volumes of information in his head. You know, and then the other thing, there's a biography out of, I think it's the Earl of Oxford, called Shakespeare by Another Name. And, you know, you read the dust jacket on this biography, and it talks about all of these things from De Vere's life that appear in Shakespeare's plays in some form or another. And so therefore, you know, it must have been De Vere who wrote them, and he was writing from his own life. And I'm thinking, he was a well-known guy, man. He was like this famous aristocrat. And you know, if there are echoes between what happens in some of the plays and the events of his life, if I were to write a play and you know, allude to various things that had some kind of symmetry with the life of Tom Cruise, does that mean that I'm Tom Cruise, right? I mean, no, Tom Cruise is a celebrity. I know something about him, and I'm going to take everything I can kind of find and use it in my work.
I think somewhere in the 20th century, somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, and of no fault of their own, I think the way that Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton and poets like them and writers like them who were highly autobiographical, I think the reception of them is partly to blame for this. But somewhere in the 20th century, we got this idea that, you know, artists create art from their own life, and that if something is in the art, it must come to some degree from the artist's own life. And so like, I mean, just a concrete example, I remember hearing at one point that Margaret Atwood wrote a novel about like an overweight woman or an obese woman. And apparently in an interview, no, not an interview, but like at a book reading, one of those book readings where there's a Q&A or whatever from the audience, someone asked her, so how did you lose all the weight? You know, and it's like the assumption that because she wrote a novel about an obese character, she must have been obese at some point. You know what I mean? We at some point in the 20th century, I think we all started to get this idea that art has to come from your own life. And I mean, I guess to a degree it always does to some degree, but it seems to have just gotten blown out of proportion in the second half of the 20th century. And I think that it has to do partly with the reception of people like Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, who did write, or like Jack Kerouac and authors like him who did. And Jack Kerouac is a particularly interesting case because basically what he was writing was just very thinly veiled autobiography, essentially. Or I haven't read any Jake Kerouac. That's just what I know about him. But like even just Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath and these writers who wrote highly autobiographical things, or like you know, Sylvia Plath's novel, The Bell Jar. Like I hear people mistakenly refer to it as a memoir, and I'll always have to be like, it is not a memoir. It is a novel. It is fiction. You know,
well, and there was a lawsuit. There was a lawsuit about The Bell Jar. I mean, I don't know the details. Given, I mean, I've read a ton of Sylvia Plath biography, but I don't know a lot of details about the lawsuit. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stink made by how kind of thinly veiled it was, and a lot of people were displeased with how they appeared in the book, et cetera, and
they should have.
You know, and I think you're right, Lukash. I think that, you know, this trend that we've seen, Steve talks about it all the time on his channel, right, of auto fiction, right? I mean, it's become the kind of default mode of fiction writing these days. It seems like 75% of what's being published these days, you know, is auto fiction on some level,
or at least highly tied up in the author's own life.
Yeah,
even if it's not directly auto fiction. Because I mean, I think I'm splitting hairs here, I know, but I think of auto fiction as a very specific thing. But anyway, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I know. I mean, myself, part of me laments, right? As much as I love, you know, confessional poetry, et cetera, part of me laments that that writers have gotten away from, for instance, like, you know, what Charles Dickens did, right? I mean, these situations, these characters, these stories. I mean, man, he just spun them out of whole cloth, right? And it's just astonishing to read, right? I mean, how can, you know, with Shakespeare and Hamlet and or something like yeah, I mean, some of Shakespeare's plays had predecessors or antecedents, right? But some of his work, I mean, it was just spun out of thin air, you know, and it's just stunning to read. And yeah, part of me feels like writers these days don't maybe trust their imaginations enough, you know, that they I don't know, that there's some kind of doubt in them that makes them feel like they have to rely on their experience as a crutch to some degree. And I wonder if the art itself is paler because of that.
Yeah, but to bring it back to the authorship question, I think that and I don't know how far, I guess if the authorship question goes back to Dickens, it probably isn't just a late 20th century thing, but it wouldn't surprise me if it got amplified in the late 20th century, just because we have this interest in, you know, the author's work having to reflect their life somehow, you know. And also, like, there's this weird sort of I don't know, sometimes when I talk to people and they recommend it tends to be musical artists for some reason, but sometimes when people recommend musical artists, one of the first things they'll tell me about them isn't they'll start with the music, but then they'll very soon say, oh yeah, and then give me some information about the person's life, you know, like that they suffer from XYZ mental illness or something like this. And I'm just like, you know, that shouldn't be what's interesting about the artist. What should be interesting about the artist is what they produce. And and so that so we have this intense interest in the author as a person too, and so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of my thought, but God, I had one more thing to say. But another thing is that I think people just wish we knew more about Shakespeare. Like again, like it was pointed out to me at one point that we actually know what we know about Shakespeare is pretty typical for authors of the time. So really, it's not like he's some mystery in relation to the other authors who were alive at the time. But he has such a stature that we wish we had, you know, a diary that he wrote or letters that he wrote, or, you know, we don't have anything that would give us this kind of insight into his life. And maybe part
well, and I think the reason that we want that we feel that is because we do love the plays so much. You know, these plays, some of these plays are just, and everybody has different ones, right? Like this person loves these 3 plays, and this person loves these 3 plays. But the plays that we love of Shakespeare feel so personal to us. And, you know, and I think that that's where a lot of the motive for wanting to know more about Shakespeare, or to kind of, you know, move his identity, map his identity onto another person comes from, is because, yeah, I mean, the plays are dear to us in some way. And so we you know, I don't, we have this hunger, or many people do anyway, have this hunger to know something of the person, of the mind, who of the life, of the everyday existence of the person who created this thing that is dear to us. And yeah, I suspect that that's where a lot of it comes from. If the plays didn't have that kind of purchase on our hearts, yeah, I don't think people would really care.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like no one's complaining about how little we know about, you know, Ben Jonson.
Yeah.
Even though Ben Jonson was also a very good writer, he's not Shakespeare. So.
Yeah, nobody is.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we have anything further about Henry IV or anything else?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, it was a good conversation about the play, and then about the authorship question and other things. But anyway, thank you everyone who made it to the end, and thank you Rainey and Jason for appearing. And next week, Rainey and Jason will be appearing one more time here, and we will be reading The Winter's Tale. And what was pointed out to me, and I didn't realize this because I was the one who came up with the schedule of when we would read which play. And it's very funny that I put with The Winter's Tale at the end, because there's that famous stage direction, exit pursued by a bear. So exit pursued by a bear. Yes, next week it'll be the last week of ShakeTember. Anyway.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I love The Winter's Tale.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, and I think it's slightly more coherent than Henry IV, so it might be easier to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, thank you all again for watching, and we will see you next week.